And Wednesdays, 11:30 to 2. Tuesdays and Thursdays, if you want to get in touch with me, if you want to come see me, send me an email and say, hey, would you be available at some point in time tomorrow? Tuesdays and Thursdays are usually my meeting days, so I don't have a whole lot of time available, but I will make time if I have to, right? I mean, we may have to get here early in the morning or something like that if you want to meet with me. My office is right across the driveway right here in that WIC penthouse, right? That little office where Residence Life is and all of that is, right? I'm up there. My office is 208. You can find me very easily. Okay, you need 2 textbooks for the course. One is a writing for the health professions course, right? This is the writing text, the thing that's going to tell me that you are capable of doing the first 4 objectives of the course, which is to, produce a unified, coherent, grammatically correct, and, professional level language, right? This is what's going to teach you that. The presentation of research and the information literacy information is going to be coming out of this, the AMA manual. You'll be using the AMA manual for the rest of your college career. So buy it and hang on to it because you're going to need it for, your upper level 529 and 613. Is there anybody in here who's not PA, by the way? Yeah, what are you, athletic training? Pre-vet? PT? PT? All right, so you guys are using the same thing, right? You're going to have the same text. Pre-vet, I would say use this too, right? I mean, it's I don't know what vets use, but I would think that if you're using this, you're doing more than probably what the veterinary science manuals would require of you, okay? So use the AMA manual. You are not going to need the AMA manual until you write the 4th paper. Now, I'm going to say that you don't need it. Hey, what's your last name?
Brian Flush.
Gotcha, thanks. I'm going to tell you that you don't need this until the 4th paper, but if you are smart, you're going to get it earlier. I know it's expensive, right? But you're going to use it for the next 2 or 3 years, so it's not going to, you're going to get your money out of it. You don't need it until the 4th paper when we actually write the research papers, but in papers 2 and 3, we're going to practice writing research style papers, but I'm not going to hold you to, any type of standard of the AMA. So the papers 2 and 3 will give you practice at writing in AMA style. I'm just not going to hold you to that standard. So if you want to get it early, great, get it and use it and try to learn from it as much as possible instead of trying to learn it all in paper 4, because paper 4 is going to be a monstrous task, right? So I suggest to you get it early, start getting familiar with it with papers 2 and 3 so that you kind of ease yourself into paper 4. But if you're short on cash and you just can't buy it right now and you need to wait until, midterm or something like that, that's fine. Just go ahead and get it then. All right, I'm not going to hold you responsible for this until paper number 4. All right, any questions on textbooks? The only other textbooks that are up here are the American Psychological Association, and that's for people who are in healthcare studies or psychology or people who might, be taking this course for a different reason. You have no reason to use that if you're PA and PT or pre-vet. Pre-vet guy, hang around after class. I want to talk to you just because of some of the difficulties we have with doing research in this institution, right? It's nothing to do that it's not going to preclude you from being successful in the course. It's just there's some difficulties of finding research. All right, everything for the course is going to be on Blackboard. All right, so if you would, right, I mean, sometime today, spend a few minutes plowing through the Blackboard course materials. As you can see, I've got the syllabus right here underneath course information, right? So the course information link will give you the syllabus. There's a couple of other things in here. Where we will spend a lot of our time, where I'm going to be putting a lot of information, is under course documents, right? So when there's some reading to be done, right? So here's some information about research and about why research is somewhat problematic, and this is what we need to be covering, right? I'm going to be giving you some articles to read for Friday, right? I'm going to need you to have these things read for assignment number 1, which we're going to be talking about on Friday. I'm going to ask you to maybe even go do some reading outside of class by, going into our databases in the library and reading up on some of the articles that are associated with the issues that we're going to be starting here with paper number 1. As you can see, right, I will also, have other links to things up in here. But there's some links here that are YouTube links, which may be live, they may not be. But I need you to know that underneath the discussion board, I will post the lecture that we have for the day to the discussion board, right? A video lecture of it. I'm recording every class that we sit through, right? That's what that little camera's doing up there, right? So that if you have to miss class, right? There's nothing more aggravating than, to a professor than someone who, sends an email and say, hey, I missed class today. Did I miss anything, right? Of course you missed something, right? No, we sat around and waited for you to come back. Is that the response you want? No. So if you miss class, you've got a bunch of things that you need to do. One, watch the video lecture, right? I don't care if you're here, if you're not here. If you don't want to come to class, great, don't come to class. You're going to suffer if you don't come to class because there's a lot of things that go on in here that are essential for you to be successful in this course. But if you miss class, if you have to miss class, you don't have to tell me you're missing class. Just do what you need to do to catch up. Watch the video lecture, get the notes from somebody, find out what's going on in the class, and at that point, if you still have questions, come see me and ask questions. We clear on that? Good. You need to be responsible for this stuff. All right? So all the course lectures, every class day will be right here underneath. As you can see, this is all last semester's lectures up here. So today I'll delete all these and I'll put the new class lecture up there. All right? So the 3 pages you need to be familiar with: course documents, discussions, and then the course information page. Now, also here is the assignments page. So every assignment that we have, I'm going to give you a link to it here. I'm going to do some explaining as to what the expectations are. And then what I also expect is that you send each of your papers to SafeAssign. Now, SafeAssign is essentially the anti-plagiarism website. So all it does is just makes a copy of the student written papers and it puts them into a database, and it runs a search of your paper against every paper that's ever been written for this class and for every paper that is published electronically out there in the world, right? So you can't cheat because I've got the silver bullet, right? So as soon as you submit your paper to SafeAssign, it will pop up an originality report and tell me not only how much of the paper is plagiarized, but the exact sources that it comes from, right? It gives me the link to them, which is great because when I go to the dean's office, right, all I do is print out the SafeAssign thing, the articles that you stole the information from, and I take it to the dean's office and I say, here, what else do I have to say, right? It's done, closed deal, right? It's in your best interest, right, to do the work yourself anyways, right? I shouldn't have to talk to you about academic honesty, but I do because every year it happens, and every year I have to sit over there at the dean's office on the other side of the table from you, and I have to, put forth, the evidence that you're cheating, right? And that's not a good thing to have on your transcript. So you're going to submit your papers to SafeAssign. Now, every paper that we write for this class, we're going to have a draft day. In other words, you're going to bring a draft of the paper in. We're going to work on it in class. We're going to exchange papers. You're going to have other people read it and make comments to it and help each other out in making your work better. Do not submit your drafts to SafeAssign, right? SafeAssign is the end product, right? So after you submit your hard copy to class, then go to SafeAssign and post your paper up there, okay? Or those people who are smart are going to think, hey, I want to make sure that my paper is not plagiarized before I turn this thing in. So the night before they submit the paper, they put it to SafeAssign, they read the originality report, they find out how much of their paper is plagiarized, and then they go back and change it. Or they send me that panicked note and say, Dr. Terry, I didn't know that my paper was plagiarized. Honestly, I didn't take this. I get it. It's not perfect, right? But it does give me the leads that I need, okay? So make sure that your final copy goes to SafeAssign. Make sure that papers are prepared on the day that they are listed in the tentative course schedule. All right, any questions on how to navigate Blackboard? Where the information is for the course? Okay, going back to the syllabus. You will be evaluated this way. 90% of the class grade is going to be based on the papers. Okay, so there's 5 major papers that you're going to write for me. The first paper is worth 0 points, 0% of your grade, right? It's a learning experience. I want you to find out what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong, right? One of the things that we're going to struggle with in this course is how to critically think about medicine, right? You guys are all in the field of medicine because you want to study science and you want to apply science to the human body. The difficulty is that the human body is variable, right? So what you think is certainty in science doesn't exist, right? In other words, if you think that if someone has a particular disease that you can write a certain prescription or you can provide some kind of treatment modality, that somehow that person through that modality or through that treatment is going to recover. Doesn't happen that way, right? Nothing is 100% effective. Nothing is ever proven in medical research. Get that in your heads right now, right? It's variability. This is the thing that we're going to struggle with. It's the reason why you guys take a stats course, right? Because we understand that the human condition is variable. That's why we have to go to statistics to kind of play out the percentages, to try to figure out, hey, if we know that nothing is certain in medicine, how can we build a scientific formula that would say that we're relatively certain? That's why we use statistics. So we're going to have a lot of conversations about stats. If you haven't taken the stats course, don't worry about it. I will explain to you how to use the knowledge that you are going to need to read the articles and be able to make assessments about them. But that's what we're going to do. We're not in this class reading articles and then telling me what the articles say, right? If you do that, you're in the wrong class, right? That's what we do with like the freshman level, right? You're in a 300 level course. I'm expecting you to be able to think critically. I'm expecting you to be able to read something and then be able to evaluate it and assess it, right? You need to be able to have conversations about the article. What does it mean? What does it not mean? Right? That's the difficulty of this course. A lot of people have been, through this academic mill where people give you assignments and they allow you to just simply regurgitate what you read, right? I know you can read. You wouldn't have made it this far in your academic career if you couldn't read, right? So I don't want to know if I'm giving you an assignment and I tell you to read a certain article or a certain paper, do you think that I really want to read what the article says? Didn't I read the paper when I gave it to you? Of course I did, right? Why would I want to read what I already know is written? I don't. No one does. No one in the profession does. We all know that certain things exist, and we know that what those things do is help us make decisions about medicine. So your job is to be able to read things, understand them, and then communicate what they mean in the body of evidence. Because one of the things we're going to talk about here is an evidence base, right? That evidence doesn't exist in a single article. In other words, someone doesn't go out and do a scientific study. You're going to find this out when you read the article about Benson and intercessory prayer. When you go out there and start reading about intercessory prayer, you're going to find out that there's some people out there who conducted scientific studies and say that intercessory prayer is effective. And then you're going to read an article by Benson where he spent 10 years working through the NIH through millions of dollars of grants, and he came up with the conclusion that studying prayer in medicine was inconclusive. So we're going to have some conversations about what does the evidence base mean. If we've got some articles over here that are saying we're getting value, we've got some articles over here that are saying we're not getting value, then what do? How do we make a decision? If we're making a decision based on one study, that's called bias, right? You can't just pick up one article and read it and say, I'm going to trust this article because what if it's wrong? There's lots of garbage out there, folks, right? 80%, and we'll talk about this, and I'm going to give you this article to read by Sharon Begley, right? This crazy person from Newsweek, is out there saying, no, all medical research is wrong, right? And she's like, 80% of everything that's written gets overturned. No kidding. We know that. As scientists, as educated people, we know that 80% of what's published gets overturned because 80% of what's published isn't randomized controlled trials. They're just baby studies. They're just people guessing at things. There's just people running through some data trying to figure some things out. So why would we trust one of those studies that we know is not significant? So your job is to start sifting through and start finding out where are the significant information pieces, where are the weaknesses, where are the strengths. How do I know what to do when I make a decision about what I'm doing in medicine? Right? Do you ever think about that? How are you making decisions? If you know that a patient walks in and sits down in front of you and says, I've got a list of these complaints, and you deduce from those complaints that this person has a certain condition, how do you know what treatment to use? Is there only one treatment to use for every condition that's out there? Absolutely not. So how do you know which one to use? Well, there's algorithms, right? Well, if there's algorithms out there, what do we need you for? Why don't people just type their conditions into a computer and have the computer spit out the algorithm? Medicine is not that understandable. You have to play the percentages. You have to look at the evidence. You have to figure things out, right? You have to be able to think on your feet. You have to be able to know the research. You have to be able to read the research and understand it. If you can't read the research and understand it, you're not going to be a good medical decision maker. You're just going to do like an amoeba, right? Stimulus response. Right? You don't have the ability to think. You have the ability to think. That's why you're in medicine. That's why we need medical providers, because they think. So this is our job, right? Is to write those kind of papers. So the very first paper I'm going to ask you to write about is going to be this intercessory prayer issue. And I'm going to say, all right, what do you think? Should prayer be part of medicine or not? There's all sorts of alternative practices out there. There's all sorts of complementary practices out there. There's all sorts of healing arts out there. You come to class on Friday prepared to tell me why you think prayer needs to be in medicine. I'm going to give you an article, and the article is going to tell you that, hey, you know what? There's people out there studying prayer, and we don't have any evidence that it can work. Is that a surprise to you? Is it a surprise to you to think that we can't conduct a scientific study and get evidence on prayer? Should that be a surprise? Absolutely not. How could we control the variables? We can't. So if you walk in here on Friday and tell me that we can't use prayer in medicine because there's no evidence, I'm going to say, no kidding. We already know that. Now tell me what your argument is. Why are some people arguing for it? Why are some people arguing against it? If we know that there's no evidence, if we can't put science to it, why are we still using it? That's your challenge. There's no right or wrong answer. I want to know what you think. I want to know that you can read and think. And we're going to do that through a course of different types of writing assignments where you are going to be looking at conditions. You're going to be looking at different treatment options. You're going to be filtering down, hey, what are the best two treatment options? Why are they the best two treatment options? And what is the evidence that shows me that those two treatment options or one treatment option is better than the other? How do I make a decision about that? We'll talk about how to build those arguments throughout the course of the semester. So by the time you get to paper number 5, which is worth the most, as you can tell, the papers get increasingly more weighty, right? And there's a reason for that, because I don't care if you don't know how to write and think here, right? I do care that you know how to write and think here. Okay, so you're going to be developing those skills during the course of the semester. Now, all the rest of this on here is, through the grading scales and stuff, that's pretty straightforward things right out of our administration. You're expected to be here. You're expected to, to have academic integrity, right? If you don't, then there are swift and severe penalties for that. There's a statement on accommodations for disabilities. Look, be here, be on time. Regular attendance is essential and mandatory for this class in order for you to be successful in it, right? If you're not here, you're not going to do well. Papers are due at the beginning of the class on that due date, right? As I put here, look, I've got 165 students this semester. I don't have time to manage individual schedules, right? I've got due dates for a reason. So all the due dates are right here on the tentative course schedule. On February 2nd, when you walk into class, you will submit your paper to me. There are no exceptions to that. Unless you've been hit by a car or something like that on the way to school, that's the only reason that you're going to be able to miss that paper. right? Or to turn that paper in late. You have email, right? So even if you know that you're going to be late or if you're going to miss school that day, send the paper to me by email. You have plenty of opportunities to submit this information to me, okay? All right, so there's the course schedule. As you can see, I've got things mapped out right until the final exam time. Any questions so far about the schedule or about the rules? Look, I probably should have written this. If you want to bring cell phones and those kind of things in class, I'm really going back to this up here. Last semester, I started getting into giving quizzes. I started to like it. So I'm going to continue that. And usually what I do with quizzes is I ask people to just write on a piece of paper, but you can also text me to my office phone, or my office phone has texting capability. So if you text me to my office phone, you can submit your answers by cell phone there. But you have no reason to record the video or the classes, and you can't record by copyright law, right? You can't record the lectures unless I give you permission to do so. I'm giving you permission, I'm giving you access to the materials by recording them here. And then I will delete these as soon as the semester is over because they're not legally available to you outside of this class time, okay? So I just wanted you to know that. I mean, I put this on here because I think it's a safe thing to say is, don't bring cell phones or other electronic things to record in class. All right, if you're going to be late, come in through that door back there, right? I'll try to open that door. Don't come in here because you disrupt everything. Print your papers out on standard pieces of paper. Follow the rules of APA or AMA. Staple them, paper clip them, print them out in something that I can read, right? Send everything to Safe Assign and keep a copy of everything that you need for this class. All right, questions, comments, concerns, anything you want to say or do about this?
You said for Safe Assign you could upload before?
Yeah, before the paper is due. Just don't submit your rough draft and then submit your final draft because it's going to come back as 99.9% plagiarized. Right, because it's going to keep a copy of the rough draft, and then your final draft is going to come in. And so just submit it once,
okay.
And but submit it before if you want to submit it before the due date, right? Submit it like the night before, and then just look at your percentages and your check.
Okay. Would we be able to change it after we?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, you change all you want. Yep, as long as you give yourself time to change it, right? Any other questions, comments, or concerns? Okay. What we need to talk about now are the objectives of the course, and essentially the 6 things that I had mentioned at the very beginning. And I'm going to kind of switch over to the projector here to try and just write this out for you. All right. You need to be able to do 6 things in this course well, right? And the 6 things that you need to do will allow you, if you can do these things adequately, you can pass, right? Do them really well, and you can get an A, right? So if you don't do them, then this was the thing that drives me nuts, right? I mean, how many of you have ever been in a class where you've had rubrics for grading systems, right? Yeah, so you get a rubric, right? So have you ever had a rubric for a writing course? Anyone ever told you that 10% of your grade is going to be dedicated to grammar and that kind of stuff? Really, 10% of my grade is going to be grammar. So I can write no punctuation. I can make subject and verb disagree. I can do whatever I want. I can just write a mishmash of words, and you're going to give me a 90 on that paper if everything else is solid? That doesn't make any sense, right? Rubrics don't work in writing for grades, okay? They work for general assessment of what people are doing. So what I've got here are 6 different objectives, right? Now, these objectives are not rubric items, right? I'm not saying that you need to do this one well enough in order to get a certain percentage of a grade. What I'm going to tell you is that you need to do all 6 of these things well in order to pass. If you don't do one well, you can't pass. That's the difficulty of this course, that a lot of people are good at one thing but bad at other things, and they think to themselves, well, the rest of the paper is good. No, it's not. The rest of the paper stinks because I can't make sense of it. So let's put this into perspective, right? Let's talk about the 6 things that you need to do in order to be successful in this course. And the first thing you need to be able to do is to unify an argument, right? So the thing that you need to be worried about the most, right, the very first thing that you do when you're putting together a paper for this assignment number 1 is unifying your argument. What does it mean to unify an argument? Well, here's normally what we do when we write papers is we have an introduction, right? And in that introduction, we have a thesis statement. And that, I know I'm going back to 6th grade here, folks, but I've got to do it, right? Because I have no idea where some people are and some people aren't. So in that introduction, you have a thesis statement, which is a point, an issue that you are going to resolve. It's something you are going to claim and something you are going to defend, right? And then in your body paragraphs, and let's say you have 3 body paragraphs in your paper, right? In your body paragraphs, each of these paragraphs is an individual argument related to that thesis, right? So if you are writing about intercessory prayer and you are claiming that intercessory prayer should not be accepted into medicine, but you start writing in a paragraph down here that some people think it should be and they've got a really good argument, well, then you're failing to unify your argument because your thesis is telling me that you don't defend it. Now, is it good to show that the other side has an argument? Yes. Tell me that they have an argument, but then tell me why it's weak. Tell me that you have an argument, discuss your weaknesses, and show me why your weaknesses aren't as weak as the other side's weaknesses. That's unification, right? What some people think is that I've got an idea, and because I have an idea, I'm right. Wrong, right? Just because you have an idea, right? What did crazy Oprah Winfrey say the other day, right? She said something about, you know, somebody has personal truths, or we all have personal truths. No, we don't. We have truth, right? Your truth, you may think differently about issues, but there's right and there's wrong, right? In this situation, with our class, there's a way to do things and there's a way not to do things, right? So just because you think that it should be done some way doesn't mean that you're right. Understand, you have a responsibility to control your readers' reactions to things. You understand that, hey, I'm making an argument that I'm going to tell you that prayer does not belong in medicine. How do I do that? What's my evidence? I'm going to show you that I've got some ways of thinking about this. We'll talk about these things on Friday. Bring your arguments to class on Friday so we can start mapping this out, so you can start building your outline. Start looking at the reasons why some people think that prayer should be in there in medicine and figure out what's wrong with their arguments and start attacking them. And start thinking about things that are wrong with your arguments and start defending those. In general, every point that you make throughout these paragraphs, these body paragraphs, every point needs to point back to that thesis. It needs to defend that. That's what unification means. And the same thing needs to happen by the time you get to your conclusion, right? When you get to the conclusion, you need to finalize that argument. You need to establish that the summary of your points is accurate. So a quick and easy summary of your main arguments, pull it together, and you've got a unified paper. What happens a lot of times with unification problems, right, is that people get to the conclusion and suddenly they start to ask questions about other things, and they start to bring up other issues. And, you know, hey, we should have probably thought about this. No, if you're thinking about it now, stop and rewrite the paper and put those things in where they belong, right? Don't bring up new arguments in your conclusion. Your conclusion, and we'll talk about how to write a projection of future research later on. But for our purposes right now, I want to know that you can unify your argument. All right. Any questions about unification? Have a thesis, defend it. That's all I'm asking you to do. The second objective is coherence. What I mean by coherence is that can you take a thought, now this could be running throughout the entire essay, it could be running just throughout a paragraph, it could be running in a sentence, but coherence means that you have the continuity of thought, that you start at this point and that you smoothly and cleanly and clearly get me to that point. That's all coherence means. Can you transition between ideas? Are your sentences connected together? Are your ideas fluidly making that argument? Are you working cohesively toward achieving your purpose, which is your thesis. Those two things are tough to teach. I can tell you about that. I can show you examples of incoherent writing. I can show you examples of papers that aren't unified. But it's tough for me to be able to tell you how to organize your thinking. That's why we have those draft days, right? So when you bring your papers into class, you can put your paper down in front of somebody else and you can say, hey, read this. Does my thesis make sense? Do my body paragraphs back up that thesis? So someone else who you trust to be a reader, right, can work through your paper with you and help you determine whether your ideas are coherent and unified. And if you find that the person sitting next to you is not a good reader, then don't work with them anymore. Find somebody else who can help you. Right? So unity, coherence will help you with this, right? Organization, if you just create an outline, if you know where you're going, you know how to get there, right? I mean, that'll be 90% of the battle. The other issues that you need to be aware of are grammar and diction. Now, let's talk about grammar first. There are rules, and you have to play by the rules. So, if you're not good with grammar, fine. I will teach you how to identify problems, and I will teach you how to correct those problems. The difficulty is maintaining that learning throughout the course of the semester. And a lot of people recognize it after someone shows it to them, right? So if you're not good at grammar, you need to be, and you need to work with people who can help you. We have writing coaches available, right? Now, writing coaches are going to be available starting February 5th, I think, is where they start over there at the Learning Center, right? So if you know that you are going to have a problem with something like any of these things, right? Go over there and sign up for a writing coach now. Now, writing coaches are not going to correct your papers for you, right? They're not going to go through and tell you, hey, fix this, put an S here, do that, right? They're not going to tell you those things. What they're going to do is they're going to identify, hey, you've got a problem with grammar. Let's look at the examples that you're creating here. And they will walk through some examples with you and show you what you're doing wrong and how to fix it, right? That's what they're going to do. Don't expect them, don't go to those people at 11 o'clock the night before our paper's due and say, hey, read my paper and fix all my problems for me, right? They're not going to do that. And if they do, I want you to tell me that, right? Because they don't need to be working for me anymore. There's two styles of grammar errors. There's primary grammar errors and there's secondary grammar errors. Primary grammar errors are the things that are the most egregious, right? The things that when you make these types of errors, people will make judgments about your academic standing, okay? So the reason why these are a big deal, right, is that people will tend to think that you're uneducated if you make these types of mistakes. They are subject-verb disagreement, comma splices, run-on sentences, and sentence fragments. They're abbreviated this way when I write them on your paper, right? I will spend class time on Friday and Monday going through these 4 major grammatical errors, right? It is something that we will work on throughout the course of the semester. But there has to be a way to quantify the errors, right, and turn it into a grade. So one of the things that I have done in the past, and I think it's an effective tool to make you learn this, is that I've made the major grammatical errors, these 4 things, worth a letter grade, right? So if you commit 4 of these things in a paper, you fail the paper. 75% of you will, in paper number 1, will commit 1. 50% of you will commit 2. Telling you that now because history has shown me that that's usually how it breaks down, right? The majority of the class will commit 1. It's basic grammar. It's your language. Let's let's learn the rules. Let's figure it out. If you have questions, you can ask me, right? If you're unsure of something, ask somebody. We'll help you. You have no excuse to make grammar errors because I'm going to show you how to read for them. I'm going to show you how to correct them, and I'm going to give you opportunities to ask questions to correct them. If you keep making grammar errors, well, then you're not working hard. It's something that we pay close attention to because as an institution, people have gotten really frustrated with the lack of attention to grammar over time. That grammar rules have seemed to slip, right? And believe me, I get it, right? I mean, there's been a lot of times, and you've probably gone through a lot of classes where your teachers and your professors don't care. You can write whatever you want. I had a student come to me just recently and say, hey, I was at another institution and my professor told me that my grammar was my personal style of writing. Well, if you want to do that in creative writing classes, great, go ahead and do that. But you're not going to do that in a professional writing class, right? Because if you do it here, and this is what we're going to talk about on Friday, if you do it in the profession, people will think you're not educated. And I'll explain to you exactly how that translates into people losing their jobs and being kind of pushed out of the profession. So these basic grammar issues, they're worth a lot because it's vitally important to your reputation. And there are secondary grammar errors as well, and we'll cover those things too. Things like parallel structure and pronoun-noun disagreement, dangling modifiers. You'll hear these things throughout the course of the semester. I'll put some samples up. I'll show you up when we do the draft day, right? I'll be looking over your shoulders. I'll be reading your papers. I'll stop everybody and say, hey, look at this. Here's a great example of a dangling modifier. And I'll put it up on the overhead, right? So everybody can see it. So, and believe me, right? I mean, people tend to think that, you know, I do that to humiliate people. And I'm not trying to humiliate you. All I'm trying to do is show you that here's a real world example. I'm telling you, right, you read these grammar textbooks and you read these sentences that no one in the world would ever write, right? Now we've got examples from what you're writing. So I can put it up and I can show you, look, here's what somebody's doing, right? Don't do this. Doing it to make sure that everybody benefits from it. So primary and secondary grammar errors. Now, the secondary grammar errors, they're not worth a point plan like the major grammatical errors are, right? But they're certainly something that you need to pay attention to because it's attention to detail. Diction. What does diction mean? College level language. Language of the profession. You are not going to write like you speak. And I'll show you that there are different levels of language formality, right? That there's slang, that there's informal, that there's popular, right? And I'll put up this little, scale to show you the different levels of language and kind of put things in perspective for you. So when we start talking about the strategies that we'll use to strengthen your diction, you're not going to be surprised because you're going to be able to say, oh, geez, now I get it. Those words don't have any meaning. If we use that kind of language, it doesn't translate as anything. We want accurate, precise terms. I'm not talking about medical terminology, even though medical terminology will become part of the conversation here. I'm talking about, can you use the English language to put down words on paper that have specific meanings? Because if you're writing sentences that don't have meaning, then you're not communicating clearly. That's it. So use words that make sense. That's all I'm asking. So if you think about this, what I'm doing is I'm talking about the essay, the components inside the essay, so paragraphs, sentences, talking about sentences here, and I'm talking about words here. I'm talking about 4 different levels of the writing process that you need to be responsible for. Now, after midterm, we're going to add 2 more objectives to that. One is information literacy, and the other is presentation of research. Now, information literacy means a lot of people translate information literacy to mean something that, can you go out and find sources in your field? In other words, do you know how to use a library? Do you know how to go out and find research, right? And you have to understand, right, that we don't do research on the internet, right? Because that's not research, that's uncontrolled. That's not science, right? Science is provided for us through databases that we have to pay for, right? So in our library, we have lots of databases like, you know, the EBSCO and ProQuest homes that we have. We have Science Direct. We have things like Dynamed that will help you understand, you know, your conditions. We have Academic Search. We have Medline, and ProQuest is a big family, but PubMed is another one. We've got lists and lists of databases. If you just go to underneath your profession on the list of databases in our library, you'll see 10 or 12 different databases come up, right? So that's where you need to be doing your research. That's where you need to be collecting your information, right? You don't go to Google and start typing in things like intercessory prayer, because you're just going to get any crazy person's ideas, right? And believe me, we got enough crazy people working in the profession. You don't need to exacerbate the problem by reading other people's who are crazy ideas, right? So information literacy means, can you find the right source material? Can you use the right source material? But more importantly, can you read it and understand it? That's the difficulty, right? What many people fail to do is recognize the meaning in the research that they read. A lot of people will read something and they'll say, hey, we found these certain results. And they'll think, oh, okay, that treatment worked. No, it doesn't. Because if you look closely at the data, right, they're just showing that there might be a change, but it doesn't mean that the change was meaningful. They might be showing you change, but they don't have any stats to back up the information so that we know that the treatment was the thing that caused the change. So unless you're reading those articles with that type of scrutiny, right, you're going to be misled. We can't afford to have you people who are going to work in medicine being misled, right? You have to be able to scrutinize research. You have to be able to pull things apart. And you have to be able to understand what it actually means. If not, you're going to be bad at your job. When people graduate in this institution and look back on the years that they spent here, what course do you think they point to as the most important and influential course in their development and thinking? This one. Yeah. There's all the other ones. Memorization, right? Learn the muscles of the body, learn the algorithms, learn the processes, learn the systems in the body. This one asks you to think. We'll find out who's a good thinker and who's not good thinkers again. Yeah, pretty quickly. So let's talk about the first paper. Intercessory prayer. Herbert Benson, PhD from Harvard University, sets up a thing called the Mind-Body Institute. And Benson decides that he can influence people's health outcomes through things like meditation, prayer, those kind of things. What do you think about that? Good? Bad? That part of medicine? Meditation part of medicine? You don't care? You don't know?
I think like certain things maybe could influence like.
Okay, whoa, stop. Right, certain things can influence your head. What do you mean?
Like if you have like a negative outlook on like what your medical condition is, like if you,
I'm a miserable, rotten person, but I'm healthy. So why am I not dead? If I have a negative outlook on life, I'm skeptical of everything. I should be dead by your thinking.
Yeah.
Do I need to have a positive outlook to be healthy? What is a positive outlook? What does that mean? I run around smiling all the time and painting smiley faces on walls or something? What does it mean? Can't really define it, so that's a problem, right? We can't define it. How do we know to use it? But Benson took that out of the equation and he said, we're going to use prayer. So he hired a bunch of people to pray for sick cardiac patients in hospitals across the country. Actually, like 3,500 patients in a couple different hospitals. And he hired people to pray for him. Now look, there's a lot of problems with his study, right? I mean, he hired certain people from a certain religion to do it. I mean, there's all sorts of different issues here. I don't care about those things. What I care about is the fact that there's no science to back this up, right? We can't produce, and that's what the articles you're going to read. You're going to read that, Benson's study was inconclusive. Now let's talk about for a minute, what does inconclusive mean?
Doesn't mean it's wrong, but it doesn't mean-
That's right. It doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that prayer doesn't work. It means that we couldn't produce enough science to determine anything about it. Right? Inconclusive means we're still at the starting gates. We haven't gained any knowledge. Right? A lot of people look at Benson's study and say, well, he didn't find any results, so prayer must not work. He couldn't find results. That's part of the problem. You can't produce science, right? We can't put science on something that doesn't operate inside the physical world, right? Science, isn't that a prerequisite of science that we have to measure things? Is there any measurement of prayer? No. So what Benson did is he had a bunch of people praying for sick people in a cardiac care unit, right? People who had heart disease and those kind of things, and he just monitored their progress. What do you think his results were? What do you think he saw? In the prayed for group, what happened to those people? What do you think happened? More of them died. Does that mean prayer kills people? No. Doesn't mean anything, right? Benson's study was inconclusive. He didn't accomplish anything. But what he did is he started a conversation about alternative and complementary practices, right? And that's where we need to put our energy, right? Is to start thinking to ourselves, okay, if someone walks into my office and says, hey, I'm doing these kind of things, or I'm interested in, you praying with me or something like that, how do you respond to that? What do you do? You say, no, I can't do that? Your suggestion is that if I pray with that person, what could happen? Could they develop some type of positive outlook themselves? Could they feel some kind of surge of supernatural energy that suddenly heals them from their condition? Is that possible? Is it possible? Of course it's possible. We don't know, right? We can't know. Is it possible the person gets sick and dies because of whatever? Sure. So if we know that there's no way of studying this, but I want you to know right now, right? Medical schools are teaching that we need to be aware of people's personal baggage. When we treat patients, we can't just treat them as a mass of cytoplasm and organelles and all those kind of things that produce some kind of scientific function. They're saying we need to understand people. We need to accommodate those people's interests and needs. If someone asks me to pray with them, right, where the medical schools are saying, you should probably do that, because what kind of benefit could it have? You don't know, right? So if it's a possibility that it could produce something, let's think about, let's just rule out for a second that there's going to be a physical change, right? Does it have a psychological effect on your patients? Could it have a psychological effect on your patients? Sure, it could have a psychological effect on your patients. So now, think about this, guys, right? This is the world of medicine you're going into, right? If there's a psychological benefit, you have to be responsible for that? You have to make your patients feel better? That's kind of a tough thing to be responsible for, isn't it? So let's think about this for a second. if we want prayer to be part of medicine, or if we want any of these alternatives to be part of medicine, what will they do for us? What's the benefit? It doesn't even have to be prayer. You can talk about any of these alternatives or complements, right? My neighbor, I saw him walking down the street one day with something that looked like a garbage can lid strapped to his back, right? He's had back problems his entire life, right? And he's got this big thing. He's walking down the street like Frankenstein. I come out of my house, I'm like, Phil, for crying out loud, what have you got on your back? And he's like, it's a magnet. Like, I'm in magnet therapies. I've been up to this magneticist who's telling me that these magnetic currents in my body can be rearranged and that they can lead me to better health and less back pain. And my initial response is, are you out of your mind? Why would you strap a magnet to the back of your body? Where is the benefit to that? But was that the response of a medical provider? No, because the response of a medical provider should be encouragement, right? Hey, yeah, you know, if that's what's going to make you better, go ahead and do it. If he thinks it's going to make him better, does it work? Tree falls in the forest, right? If the patients think that the treatment is going to make them better, you guys for it. Let's hire cheerleaders when they're at hospitals. You can do it, man. Give you that emotional energy. Or the flip side of that is medicine a belief system? Do people heal because they think what you're doing for them is making them better? Or is there some kind of physiologic change? Is there a component? It's a good question to ask, right? I want to know. I want to know what you think. Some people are going to say, well, there's no evidence that it doesn't work. I'm going to say, we can't have evidence. So take that out of your vocabulary, right? There's no such thing as evidence when we're studying something like prayer. But I do have a certain kind of evidence, and that's thousands of years of use, right? Why have humans prayed for thousands of years? Don't you think that would have stopped if it didn't work? Is that evidence? Is thousands of years of use evidence? It's a kind of evidence. It may not be scientific evidence, but it's certainly a kind of evidence. It's not good, but it's a kind. So when people say there's no evidence for prayer, I'm like, yes, there is. People have been doing it for thousands of years. It's historical evidence. So should we accept it or not? Tell me. And give me some reasons. Give me reasons. Give me one reason why we should or should not accept it.
If it has no negative effects, why not do it?
Can you know that it has negative effects? Can you know? Can you know that it has negative effects or not? Can't know that. Does that sound reasoning? How do we know what prayer can do? You have to be careful, right? The things that you argue have to be rational, right? If you tell me that there's no negative effects, I'm going to say, how can you possibly know that? You can't do a study on it to know if it has positive or negative effects, right? Somebody else give me a reason why you think you should or should not do it. Whatever you argue, I'm going to have a counter argument for. So don't be afraid, right? Because there's no right answer in this. This is the reason why it's an argument, right? We don't. If the argument was resolved, we wouldn't be writing about it, right? So give me a reason why, someone give me a reason why we should accept it. Someone give me, I'm gonna pick on.
So I guess if there's the possibility of improvement, then why not?
Okay, so if there's a possibility of improvement, we should do it. So let's take that, someone give me a counter argument, so why that could be faulty reasoning. Yep,
Or maybe just because prayer is inconclusive, we shouldn't even bother with it. Like, say someone has cancer, I mean, people pray and everything, but you shouldn't be like 100% dependent on prayer, because
yeah, I don't think anybody's saying that, right? No one's saying stop practicing medicine and just do prayer, right? I think we're saying that should prayer be part of medicine, right? So don't take it to some illogical extreme here, right? I'm not saying, that. I'm just saying, is it part of medicine or not? Her argument was that there's a possibility it might do something good, then we should accept it. Why? Someone tell me why there's a weakness to that argument.
Because we can go the other way too. Possibility they could do something bad.
Okay,
Maybe there's, an angry God that gets mad when you pray to him, so he just makes the person worse.
maybe.
You don't know.
You don't know, right? Yeah. Or how about this? Think about the extension of if we accept something like prayer because there's a possibility that it works, then don't we have to accept every possible thing that someone walks in with because it could possibly help them? So if someone walks in one day and says, I want to eat dirt because it makes me feel good, are you going to agree with that and say, go home and do it? It helps you. All right, on Friday, come prepared, right? Come with your reasons. Come with your understanding that whatever you provide in your argument is going to have weaknesses. Going down. We want to talk about all those articles that I listed up there for you. The 3 articles, the one from Murphy, the one from Begley. And if you can find some research on Benson and look at it, I'll show you some of the stuff that came from Benson's article. But none of that stuff really matters. What we want to talk about are your reasons and your arguments, right? Because that's what you're preparing yourself for. And then we'll go right into those grammar issues on Friday as well. All right. See you then, folks.